Most 22-year-olds who find themselves with their first $5,000 do one of two things. They spend it on something that feels like a reward, a new phone, a wardrobe upgrade, a holiday they'll post about and forget by February. Or they park it in a savings account earning 3% and convince themselves they're being responsible. And then 5 years later, 10 years later, they wonder why their financial situation looks almost identical to where they started. The first $5,000 you have to your name isn't just money, it's a test. And the way you handle it will either put you on a compounding trajectory that builds quietly in the background for the next 2 decades, or it will reset you back to zero again and again until you're 42 and still having the same conversations about money you were having in your early 20s. Here's what that gap looks like in real numbers. Take 2 people, both 22. Both come across $5,000 at the same time. Person A deploys it across a specific framework. Person B does what most people do, spends it the way it feels natural to spend it. By age 42, at a 10% average annual return, which is historically consistent with the S&P 500 across any 20-year rolling window, Person A's $5,000 has compounded to over $33,600 from that single decision alone, without a single additional dollar contributed. Add just $200 a month into the same account during that period, and the number crosses $180,000. Person B is starting over. Again, that is the gap. It doesn't come from income. It doesn't come from getting lucky. It comes from one decision made once, when most people think it doesn't matter yet. Now, here is the thing most people tell themselves when they hear this. $5,000 isn't enough to make a real difference. I'll get serious about money when I have more. That belief is not just wrong. It is the single most expensive belief a 22-year-old can hold. Compounding doesn't care about your intentions. It only rewards when you start. So let's talk about what actually happens to the first $5,000, because there are really only 5 paths people take, and most people don't realise they're on one until it's too late to change direction. The 5 spending paths. Every 22-year-old with $5,000 ends up on one of these paths, whether they choose consciously or not. Path 1 is the lifestyle upgrade. This is the most common one by a significant margin. The $5,000 becomes a new laptop, a wardrobe refresh, a weekend away, or a deposit on a car that costs more than it should. None of these are individually unreasonable. The problem is the opportunity cost. A 2022 survey by Charles Schwab found that 59% of Americans describe themselves as living paycheck to paycheck, and the most common reason cited wasn't low income. It was spending that matched or exceeded income growth at every stage. The lifestyle upgrade path feels like a reward for getting the money. It is actually a reset button that most people hit repeatedly for a decade before they realise what's happening. I knew someone who saved $6,000 by the time he was 23. Smart, hard-working, disciplined enough to accumulate that kind of money young. He bought a second-hand BMW with it. The car payments, insurance, and unexpected repairs ate through 3 years of savings. At 26, he was financially in almost exactly the same position he'd been in at 21. He told me later, the worst part wasn't the money, it was the time. 3 years of compounding he could never get back, and a car that was worth half what he paid for it. Path 2 is the safe hold. This is the one people think is responsible. They put $5,000 into a savings account and leave it. At 4.5%, an unusually high rate by historical standards, that $5,000 becomes roughly $12,300 in 20 years. That sounds acceptable until you account for inflation, which has averaged approximately 3.4% annually over the last century. In real purchasing power, you've barely moved. Holding cash feels like discipline. In terms of actual wealth building over 2 decades, it is one of the slowest paths you can take. Path 3 is the panic investment. This is when the $5,000 goes into a meme stock a friend mentioned, a crypto coin that was up 400% last month, or a day trading account opened after watching a few tutorial videos. I'm not going to tell you these never produce returns. Some people get lucky, but research from the University of California found that the top 25% most active retail traders lose an average of 3.8% of their portfolio annually through overtrading, net of any gains. The panic investment path is almost always driven by FOMO, not strategy. And money moved by FOMO is money that tends to return to zero faster than almost any other path. Path 4 is the pure skill investment. This one is genuinely better than the first three. The $5,000 goes into courses, coaching, tools, or certifications that build income-producing capabilities. Research from Georgetown's Center on Education and the Workforce has shown that targeted skill investment, measured as income uplift over 5 years, can outperform stock market returns in the right fields. The limitation is that skill alone doesn't compound the way capital does. You can become highly skilled and still trade time for money indefinitely. Skill without capital deployment is a ceiling, not a launch pad. You need both, deployed together. Path 5 is the compounding launch. This is what person A did. It's the path that creates the 20-year gap. It's not about picking one thing to do with $5,000. It's about a specific allocation across 4 categories that work together and reinforce each other. And that brings me to the second framework, the Wealth Multiplier Stack. The Wealth Multiplier Stack is the allocation model that separates the people who are still financially flat at 42 from the ones who aren't. It runs across 4 layers and the order matters. Layer 1 is the foundation. 20% of your $5,000, that's $1,000, goes into a liquid emergency fund, not a long-term savings account. A separate, accessible account you do not touch unless something genuinely goes wrong. The reason this comes first is not about returns. It is about protection. Without a buffer, every market dip or unexpected expense forces you to liquidate investments at the worst possible time. The foundation keeps the other 3 layers intact. Layer 2 is the market engine. 40% of your $5,000, $2,000, goes directly into a broad market index fund. A total stock market ETF or an S&P 500 fund is the most straightforward entry point for most people. At a 10% average annual return over 20 years, that single $2,000 becomes approximately $13,455. Nothing added, no active management. Just time and consistency. The power is not in the starting amount. It is in starting before you feel ready and then not touching it. Layer 3 is the skill engine. 25%, $1,250, goes into deliberate skill development that directly connects to a measurable income increase. The key word is deliberate. Not a random course that sounded interesting. A specific skill that closes the gap between what you currently earn and what you could earn within 12 to 18 months. If you work in marketing, it's paid media or analytics. If you're building something on the side, it's whichever skill is the current bottleneck. The income increase this layer produces feeds directly back into layers 2 and 4, which is exactly what makes the stack a compounding system rather than just an allocation. Layer 4 is the asset seed. The remaining 15%, $750, starts a position in an income-producing asset. Dividend stocks, a REIT, a high-yield index fund that distributes quarterly, or the first investment into a side income stream. The amount at this stage is almost secondary. What the asset seed actually does is install the investor mindset at a neurological level. You now have a position that generates returns while you sleep. That experience, even at $750, permanently changes how you think about the relationship between money and time. The stack works because each layer protects and feeds the others. The foundation prevents liquidating the market engine at the wrong moment. The skill engine accelerates the income flowing into all 4 layers. The asset seed begins building income independence from day 1, rather than treating it as a distant goal. The compounding variables. Here is what most financial content skips entirely. The stack is the structure, but there are 3 variables that determine whether the stack actually runs for 20 years or quietly falls apart in year 3. These are the compounding variables. Variable 1 is identity. Dr. Wendy Wood at USC, who spent 3 decades studying behavioral change, found that sustained financial behavior almost never comes from willpower or motivation alone. It comes from identity shift. The people who build wealth consistently over 20 years don't think of themselves as trying to be better with money. They think of themselves as investors. That shift changes what feels natural to spend on, who you seek out for advice, and which decisions feel acceptable. Deploying the stack for the first time is the fastest trigger for this shift, because you have now, factually, made 4 investment decisions with your first $5,000. Whatever you called yourself before, you are now an investor. Variable 2 is the reinvestment habit. The first $5,000 sets the template. What you do with the next $5,000 either confirms that template or breaks it. The biggest threat at this stage is not a market downturn, it is lifestyle inflation. The gradual, almost invisible expansion of spending that follows every income increase. A 2021 Vanguard study found that investors who automated their contributions had retirement balances nearly 4 times higher after 30 years compared to those who invested manually. Same income, same market, just different sequencing. The reinvestment habit is about making the stack automatic before the lifestyle upgrade. Instinct has a chance to redirect the money. Variable 3 is the patience window. This is the variable that eliminates most people. Compounding does not feel like anything for a long time. In year 1, $2,000 in a market index fund might generate $200. That is not impressive. In year 10, that original $2,000, assuming reinvestment, has grown to roughly $5,187 and is generating over $500 annually. In year 20, it is over $13,000 and generating more than $1,300 per year from the original $2,000 with no additional contributions. The math is not complicated, but the patience window, the years where nothing visible seems to be happening, is where the majority of people exit. They sell, they redirect the money, they decide it is not working fast enough, and they reset the compounding clock to 0. Here is the plain truth. The gap between someone who is financially free at 42 and someone who is still financially stressed at 42 is not intelligence. It is not income level. It is not luck. In the overwhelming majority of cases, it is whether or not they stayed in the game during the years nothing felt like it was happening. The $5,000 decision at 22 is not really about $5,000. It is about which trajectory you put yourself on, and whether you understand early enough that wealth is not a destination you arrive at someday. It is a direction you either choose deliberately or drift away from, one spending decision at a time. The 5 spending paths exist whether you know about them or not. The Wealth Multiplier Stack works whether you believe in it or not. The compounding variables will shape your outcome whether you have named them or not. The only thing that is genuinely in your hands is which path you take when the first meaningful money shows up. At 22, that decision feels small. At 42, it is one of the biggest financial inflection points you will ever look back on, in either direction. Subscribe to Wealth Scroll. The next video goes deeper on exactly how to execute the market engine layer, including the specific funds worth understanding and the ones that sound good but aren't.